we'd say this, we also want to be where He'd have us to be. Sometimes there's things that God would like for us to do as well. We want to be just as faithful to Him as He is to us. Let's turn to Mark, the 12th chapter this morning. Mark chapter 12. In Mark chapter 12, we'll begin at verse 41. And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. And many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And He called unto His disciples, and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Now, as we consider this picture, it's interesting that maybe they had chosen to record it in the Bible. But I believe it's recorded to teach us some things. We think about it as he describes the picture and sets up the condition. It says, Jesus sat by the treasury and beheld how the people cast money in. It said, many that were rich cast in much. And oftentimes as society, and that's what we'd notice. Many that are rich cast in much. And we'd notice that and we'd think, wow, look at what they did. And sometimes many that are rich cast in much because people will say, wow, look what they did. But, it says that along came a certain poor widow and she threw in her 2 mites, and probably she didn't expect anybody to say, wow, look what she did. She just probably quietly cast in her 2 mites and maybe even hoped nobody noticed that all she had was 2 mites. And for us, that might be a couple of pennies worth, But she came and she cast it in, but Jesus took note, and I believe He wanted the disciples to get the idea that there's more to giving than just how much. And certainly in this case, he was making a point. There is more to giving than just how much. He said they cast in of all their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Now He saw something about hers that had a lot more to it than just how much. And this morning, as we consider the Word, we want to think about that because, what she did that the others really were not doing is she made a sacrifice. She put into it something that touched her. Something that affected her life. Something that made a difference about how she was going to go forward from that point. And as we think on this thing, we realize that our first thought might go along the line of giving. And I would say this, that certainly as we live our life, we want to live in such a way that we're willing to not just give of our abundance, because when you give of your abundance, you just give when it's convenient. Well, it's convenient. I got plenty here. I'll put a little bit into this now. But when we give, sometimes it's good that we give, and it's maybe inconvenient. we maybe have to, figure out, how am I going to make all this work? Think about it a little bit. And it seemed like that, sometimes times when things come up and we maybe need to give or maybe need to do something, we could look around and go, this is just not a very good time for me. But it tests our quality a little bit to give when it's inconvenient. But as we consider the thoughts this morning, it's not just about giving, but it's about that part of our life that as we live for God, there should be a part of our life that involves sacrifice to Him. It involves us putting ourselves out a bit for God. And Christ, as He observed that she put herself out a real amount. She really put something into it. And there should be a willingness on our part to sacrifice for God. To maybe put some things aside in our life as we go about our life, to look at it and realize that maybe there's this thing I need to put aside. It's a thing that it just doesn't fit in real good with me serving God. Or maybe there's a point where for me to really be useful to God, I've got to let go of some things that I like. There is an element of sacrifice in our serving God. And we want us to realize that sometimes people would, a lot of times people would like to serve God without that part. But that's a part of it. And if we're really going to serve God and live that life that's acceptable in God's sight, that sacrifice part is going to be part of it. If we look at Acts, the 17th chapter. In Acts chapter 17, beginning at verse 24, it says, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that He is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. Neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though He needeth anything, seeing He giveth to all life and breath and all things. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after Him, and find Him, though He be not far from every one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also His offspring. Now Paul, as he spoke to these people on Mars Hill in Athens, this was the part of his message that we want to consider. God made the world and everything that's therein. And He don't need anything from us. Now, think of it that way. As far as truly needing anything, God don't need anything from us. It's not like that He's going to go hungry if we don't feed Him. It's not like that He's going to suffer cold if we don't clothe Him. God doesn't, in that sense, if you think on it, God doesn't really need anything from us. In fact, as we consider it, we realize this. He says here, He says, in Him He gave us life and breath and all things. In Him we live and move and have our being. We need God. And the other thing we'd observe is not only do we need God, but God has provided for us. And He provides us really many good things. And we think about it, God has provided for us, and not only has He provided for us, He has placed within our hand certain of His resources. He's given us things. Now I know sometimes that people say, well, I earned it. Well, He put us here. In Him we live and move and have our being. We have breath, strength, and those things because He gives them to us. He could certainly speak the word and we'd find out those things are no longer there. He doesn't, in that sense, He doesn't need what we've got. But I say that for recognition. Some say, well, you mean I don't have to, put anything into God's work? I don't have to put... Remember, He put the resources in your hands to get the work done. So yes, we are to use our goods for God's work. I understand that. But I want us to think about it, particularly as we consider this thought of sacrifice. When we make a sacrifice in our life for God, it is not because God needs us to do without so He'll have enough. But that sacrifice does have a place. It's not that we're doing it because God is needy, but we're doing it because there's something moves within us towards God. And He said here, He's not worshipped with men's hands. God doesn't need us to build temples. He doesn't need us to do all of those things because He is unable to. Oftentimes we build buildings. We're thankful we can build buildings because it gives us a place to meet and to worship and to do those things. But God doesn't need that. He's not like us. He doesn't need a house. We talk about church sometimes when we say God's house. God, in our opinion, should own this building, but at the same time, He don't have to live here. He's not like us. He don't need shelter. But we do. But there should be a part in us that's willing to put itself out for God. And to do it because that there is a desire within us toward God. And He said that God put man in such a position. He made all nations that in appointed time and bounds of their habitation and so on, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after Him and find Him. And that's really where we are at as people, to seek the Lord. We want to find Him, and that's part of the sacrifice of our existence. It is us reaching out to God, not us doing because God is dependent upon us. We think about it as far as the worship of God is concerned. As Jesus was here and walked among men, He made the point that, as far as praising Him, if the people didn't, the rocks would cry out and get the job done. So He's not necessarily even totally dependent in that thought on our praise. But He wants us to praise Him. He wants us to worship Him. He wants us to honor Him. We were put here to seek after God. And because of that, we should be willing to give of ourselves that we can walk with Him. We turn to Psalm, the 50th chapter. Psalm 50, and beginning at verse 7, it says, "Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O to Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices, or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not offer unto God thanksgiving, and pay thy vows unto the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me." Now we see here as this psalm presents it from the point of view of God. He says, I'm not going to reprove you for your sacrifices. That should have been there. And I want us to see that. God's not going to come down and say, look, you didn't sacrifice. But they ought to be there. God's not going to come down and reprove them, he said, for their sacrifices. He said, I'm not going to come get the bullocks out of your house or the goats out of your fold. He says, I already have the cattle on 1,000 hills. I don't need to come in your barn and get one. He said, I have all the wild beasts. All those that you can't even claim as yours are God's. He says, if I was hungry, I wouldn't tell you. God doesn't. He's not dependent upon us. And certainly as he spoke to these people, he was making the point that, the things that they put on that altar and offer wasn't what God was after. When they brought that lamb and they offered it, God wasn't after a lamb. When they brought that bull and offered it, God wasn't after a bull. But he said, what really does God care about? Our thanksgiving, our commitment to him. He said, your vows unto the Most High. That we have towards God is what God cares about. And we start thinking about it, it should be within us. He said, call on me in your troubles, and he would supply, and we would glorify God. Now what God's interested in is what is in us towards God. What's in our heart? How do we feel towards God? Do we feel indifferent? We shouldn't. Do we feel like, well, God should have done this and God should have done that? Sometimes people get in that position that they're towards God. Their thought is, well, God should have made me rich and he didn't. Or God let this happen to me and he shouldn't. God allowed me to go through trouble and I shouldn't have had trouble. Well, that's no way to be. But sometimes that's how people feel towards God. And if that's your feeling toward God, I'll say this. You can bring bulls and you can bring calves and you can bring all kinds of things. Something else needs to change. Because God isn't going to be impressed. Maybe some of those people going in and putting that much in the treasury, that big thing in the treasury, but if there was not a real worship toward God in their heart, that much didn't mean anything. God could look on it and say, I knew that gold when it came out of the ground. I knew before it came out. It didn't mean anything to him. But when we begin in our heart to have a thanksgiving towards God, when we begin to have a worship towards him, when there is a love towards Him, then you begin to get to what does matter to God. That's the part that is of interest to Him. When there's a thanksgiving, a love and an appreciation there, that is precious in the sight of God. And because that's there, people will sacrifice for God. There's an appreciation. You know, somebody does something for you, you want to do something good back, don't you? Why? Someone helps us out. We want to do something good back. We want to, maybe give them something. Maybe sometimes all we can do is send them a thank you card, but we want to do something back. Well, that should be what works within our heart that makes us live a life that is given in that thought and sacrifice to God. Because we begin to realize He's done so much for me. I'd like to give something back. I'd like to do something for Him. And when that love and thanksgiving and appreciation comes up in our heart, then we can do something that God says, I like that. It's pleasing to Him. And that's the quality of sacrifice that should be in our life. That we realize God's done something for me. Oh, that I could do a little something for Him. And that little something, if you really have thanksgiving and appreciation in your heart, you're not going to go, oh, too much is too much. God's done plenty for me. Lord, let me do something for You. If it puts me in a little bit of a difficult place and pushes me a little hard, our thought should be, Lord, I still want to do it for You. In fact, that's when it really begins to show forth that we do love Him and we care. That even though it's not necessarily convenient, we want to give back to Him and honor His name. We'll look at 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. In 1 Corinthians 9, and beginning at verse 16, it says, For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. For if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me. What is my reward then? Verily that when I preach the gospel, I make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. For though I be free from all, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. Now the Apostle Paul here says, if I preach the gospel, sometimes people look and go, wow, you preach the gospel. That makes you special. Not necessarily. It says, though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. Particularly if I just do it as a responsibility. If I just view it as, well, this is my responsibility, this is my duty, what have I? He said to glory in. It's a necessity. And you could carry it so far as to say, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. His thought was, I could carry this so far. If I don't do it, I'm in trouble. Well, the glory's not there. That's not where the glory of God is found. Where is it found? He says, but if I do it willingly. Now that's different. If I do it willingly. If there is a want to. And that's what we think about when we consider that part of our life that is a sacrifice to God, if I view it as, oh, I have to sacrifice for God, we've missed it. There's nothing there. But when it becomes a willingly, if I can do this for God, I want to. Then there's something in it. There's a reward in that. There's a benefit in that. You say, well, you mean I get something? You really won't experience the blessings of God when you make sacrifices in your life for God until there's a willingness in it. I'm afraid sometimes that the trouble is that you have with people really serving God acceptably is this: they're doing everything as a duty. I have to be commanded to do this or I don't do it. If that's your approach to serving God, you're never going to enjoy it like God intended for you to. It won't be a glory. It won't be a wonder. It won't be a blessing until you begin to willingly serve God. The Apostle Paul grasped that. He knew what it was to make sacrifices because it's my duty, because it's my responsibility, because I have to. He knew that under the old law, and he never enjoyed it then. Oh, he put himself into it. He made some, I believe the Apostle Paul made some real sacrifices under the old law. But he never found the glory in it until it got beyond, this is duty, this is responsibility, this is what I have to do. And he began to serve God from the willingness of his heart. He was willing. And so it was, he said, if he did it against his will, it was a dispensation. He had been given a responsibility. It's your job to go dispense this to people. But he went willingly. He said, what's my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I make the gospel of Christ without charge. I abuse not my power. He says, I'll be free from all. But I have made myself a servant unto all, that I might gain the more. That was the element of sacrifice in his life. And it was a willing sacrifice. God didn't jerk him up in the morning and say, now look, you're done in this town and you need to go in the next town where they're going to have a riot and they're going to persecute you, but you have to do it. The Apostle Paul got up and after all the things he had suffered in one place, and it was, I'm ready to go do it again. It was a willing sacrifice. And that was a sacrifice. We'll go there. You go to the 12th chapter of 2 Corinthians, and as we go there, realize the Apostle Paul began to describe. He says, I had this thing and I prayed to God, take it away. And I believe part of that thorn that he was suffering was everywhere he went, he was opposed. And his prayer was, God, take it away. But he was willing. He was willing to suffer those things if that's what glorified and honored God. In 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, the part we want to read here begins at verse 14. Up early in the chapter, he said that he prayed thrice, and God sent the messenger of Satan to buffet him, and he suffered it, and it kept him right in his place, and he had to stay sacrificial. He had to be willing to bear an awful lot. Beginning in verse 14, he says, Behold, the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you, for I seek not yours, but you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. And I will very gladly spend and be spent for you, though the more abundantly I love you. the less I be loved. Now this kind of tells how Paul saw it. He did have to get up and go face some more troubles, time and again. He ended up going to prison. He wasn't sorry. He wanted to go to Rome, and it seemed like he was willing to go to Rome that way, go in chains, but to bear the gospel. He was always willing to do for the gospel, to lift up God, honor Him. And so as he was desiring to go this third time to the Corinthians, he said he's ready not to be burdensome, not to seek yours. You know, oftentimes when it comes to this element of sacrifice, we want to give God what's ours. That which really, if we see it right, is what's God's, that's in our hands. But He doesn't want yours. He wants you. That's really what it comes down to. God doesn't want yours. He wants you. And that's when we start thinking about this thing of living a life that is a sacrifice to God. He doesn't want ours. He wants you. Now, I would observe this. When He gets you, He'll have yours. But too often, people, their approach to God will be, well, God, here you can have this. God, you can have this. God, you can have this. And it seems like that sacrificial part just still doesn't quite get there. Why is it? Well, you're giving yours. You haven't got to you yet. God wants you. He wants you to turn yourself over to Him where it's, God, I am willing to do whatever you want. You got me. Take my life and use it. And if it means sacrifice, I'll gladly, as he said here, I will very gladly spend and be spent. Now that's the kind of sacrifice God's looking for. Something that stems from a willingness. Something that stems from a love. Something that at its root, it's the one thing you can give to God and it's from you to God. You think about it, you can't give Him your wealth. He already made it. You can't give Him really time. He made that. But the one thing you can give to God, if we could see it, is that willing, heartfelt love. That's the thing that we can give back that is from us to Him. The only way it can go that way is for us to give it. As we said a Sunday or two ago, you can't command love. It is the sacrifice that has to come from you to God. And so we think about it, it's in that light that God looks for us to live a life of sacrifice. It is a life whereby our love gives back. All of the other things we might do, and I believe it's in order for us to take our money and spend it we need a church building, whatever, to take it and spend it, to do it that way. It's in order for us to take our time and use it for God. But all of those things so often people do only as duty, as responsibility. They never reach the point that it flows from sacrificial love. But that's what we need this morning, is a sacrificial love that says, I will spend and be spent for you, God. Anything you want, I just want to do that which is pleasing in your sight. I want to do that which brings about the most glory and honor to your name. I want to do that which really says back to God, God, I thank you for what you've done for me. It is that which stems from the heart. Now, it might show up in hours. It might show up in us spending. It might show up various ways, but it is that within the heart that is willing, because of the love and the gratitude that's there, to sacrifice for God. We can't command that. You know, sometimes we would wonder, as you endeavor to lead people, you would wonder, am I, well, it's like they say about the president. He's trying to fight a war without demanding a sacrifice from the people. We wonder, as a leader, am I trying to point people the way and leave out the sacrifice? But you know, I can't demand the sacrifice. And you give to God what really matters to Him. We have to demand it of ourselves. We have to, within ourselves, have that willingness and that love and that gratitude that says, I'm going to push myself to do something that's inconvenient because I love God and I want to worship and honor Him. I want to lift Him up. And it'll show up in various aspects of our life, but there should be within us that sacrificial love that says, I'm going to give more to God than just my abundance, just my convenience. I'm going to give to God that which takes something from me and gives it back to Him. We do appreciate God's love to us this morning, but that is the sacrifice that is acceptable when we in love give back to God. That which can only come because we love Him enough to deny ourselves and give of ourselves to Him instead. We appreciate His sacrifice for us. There needs to be some sacrifice by us because we love Him and want to glorify and honor and give back to Him for what He's done for us. Let's have a song. Well, that's where God wants to be. First place, He wants to be not the God of our convenience, but the God of our heart and of our life. He wants to be the one that, we go to Him with all of our troubles, but we glorify Him with our life. Lord, here's my troubles. I need your help. But as He works in our life, and we believe that God does work in people's lives. We believe He hears prayers. He supplies needs, but as He does, that should just stir within us a greater desire, a greater love that says, I want to glorify Him. I want to honor Him. I want Him to be lifted up in my life. Not just as a convenience, but something that just reaches back. He has the first place in our heart. He's the very center of our life. And we gladly give to Him. When God says, will you do this for me, it shouldn't be. I get this sometimes from some kids. It shouldn't be, do I have to? When God speaks to us, we ought to be, yes, Lord. What is it? What do you want? I'm willing. I want to do something. Now I get that from kids sometimes too. Sometimes they're willing. They want to help you. But, if our God has the first place in our heart, it won't be, Lord, you'll have to. Yes, Lord, I'm willing. Just tell me what. I've been wanting to do something. Thank you for telling me what I can do. Lord, have the first place. That's where we want.